All right, so I am going to show you how you might be able to trim down a strip that is too large. Oftentimes, when you're doing your mani, sometimes you might be sharing your nail strips with a friend, and you're doing your nails and you realize that you don't have enough of a certain size. If you're trying to figure out if your nail strip is too large or too small, you may sometimes find that if they're too small, like for instance, this one is obviously too small for my thumb, you can actually use two strips, so one here and then another one on the other side. Depending upon the shape, you might need to trim the edge of it so that in this case, I don't end up with like a gap there at the bottom where it curves upwards. But you can definitely double those. I've seen people who have really wide thumbnails, and even the widest strip is not wide enough for their thumbs, in which case they might use maybe one of the tiniest strips in the pack. That's like the little slivers, right? Use that one first, and then put the widest strip over the top. So use the small one first, and then the wide one over the top, and that's so that you cover the most space. And then you can always come back later and add something like our plumping top coat or our nail strengthener to seal those edges if you're like me and you sometimes pick at them. But when you've got a strip that's too large, that's a lot easier to fix in my mind because I oftentimes will just apply the strip and then trim it while it's on my nail to make it the right size. However, sometimes that just, it's a lot of pressing on your cuticles. If your cuticles are already kind of sore from like the winter, you may not want to do that. And so there are some tips to be able to trim these ahead of time. But I'm going to show you first if I'm using, I'm going to apply this strip and I'm going to use this one on my index finger. And then I'm going to save this. Actually, I think what I will do is I'm going to use this as a sample for the width of where my. I know I'm going to use this strip for my index finger, but I want to use this strip for my middle finger. But it's a little wide for the middle finger. It's normally one that I would use on my thumb. So I do like that the edge is a little bit squared because this kind of mimics the strip that I usually use on my middle finger, but it is rounded indeed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a baseline. And because I've kind of already looked at the shape of my nails, I kind of have an idea of about where this might fit. And if I look on here, I can see that I probably need to cut off, sorry, there we go, off camera. I'm probably going to need to cut off a little bit, right? So I know that this strip here, this is the one I'm going to use on my index finger, is actually kind of not far off. So I'm just going to trim a little bit on the edges there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I don't need a ton, right? I just need a little bit to be trimmed off. And then what I will see is if it fits there. And sometimes you might need to tidy it up a little bit, or, once if you have an extra of the strip that you definitely want to keep, sometimes what you can do is use it as your base to measure from, and that works really well, especially if you know that there's like a certain strip in there that's normally the one you use for your index finger, but you just don't have an extra of it and you needed two because your friend needs it too. Then you can always reuse that card after she has finished to be able to do that. So I know that this one's probably going to be still a little bit wide, but not too terribly off. So I'm going to definitely go ahead and remove this clear strip off the top now that I have trimmed that end. And I'm going to turn the strip sideways on the card. And that's just to give me a little bit of leverage. It makes it a little bit easier for me to hold on to. And I'm going to just get that right up to that cuticle line, right where I want it to be. And then I'm going to press it down with that finger, right? So now that I can push it all the way down on the sides, I can see that one's pretty close. And on the other side, it might be just a little bit, sorry, not trying to flip anybody off. It might be just a little bit close to the edge, but I think I can make that one work. If I pull the skin back a bit, I can take my thumbnail, because you know I'm doing my thumbs last, and I can press it down into that little crevice. And then I have a nicely manicured nail that I have already trimmed. Now, if I like that size, and I do, what I am going to do is now use that same end of that cardboard that I've already, or the card backing that I've already used, and I'm going to stick my strip on to that end. Now I do need to remove this tear tab so I make sure I get the location correct. And then what I want to do is make sure that I have space here to trim the edge on it. So I've saved it because it's on this card backing. I'm not touching it, and now I can trim it so that it's a similar shape. And you can see here, if I've got these edges on my nail, I can always let them dry, let it finish curing, and then I can always come back and file those edges down. But I usually just leave them there so that I don't take away too much extra. Sometimes what happens is these strips, we keep fiddling with them, we keep pulling at them, and then before you know it, you've pulled off an edge, and then you don't have a clean corner on your nail. So definitely try not to fiddle with them too much. Just trust the process. As it dries and cures, these little pieces that stick off the edge onto your skin are going to easily just come right off. They just flake off. All right. All right, so now I'm going to take this strip. I'm going to do the same thing so that I can do my other middle finger, because they're similar in shape and similar in size. And I'm just going to try and straighten this one up a bit. Now, the one thing I will say is that I know that one of my fingers is a little more rounded than the other. For my middle finger. They're not both the exact same shape. And I tell you that because, you know, sometimes I hear people say, well, you know, then the one that I need for my pinky is too small. There should be more. And you know, the thing to remember is that none of our nails are exactly the same. My two thumbnails are different widths. So, you know, these strips are meant to be customizable, right? So you can use them to you can help them to be flexible, because you can trim them, you can cut them, you can cut it in half and make a straight edge so that you can use a diagonal. There's a lot of ways that you can use them outside of just the size that they come straight out of the box. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this one to this nail right here. And I know it's going to be a little bit wide because my nail is slightly different size than the other one. And I'm going to remove that paper backing. And I'm just going to press it down into this corner, and you can see over here, if I press it all the way into that crevice, it's still going to pop up a little bit here. And I'm going to show you how to trim that, because you can see here, if I remove the skin and I try to push it back down, it's still just a little bit too wide. So I'm going to do that on the other side. It's also a little bit too wide. So again, I'm using my thumb as my greatest tool. And I'm just going to perforate that at the edge to remove the excess. All right, and then here on this side, there's a couple ways that you can trim this. You can use your thumbnail, which is also helpful. I also find it helpful to use my metal cuticle stick because it has kind of a blade-like edge to it. It can cut you, it can cut your cuticles, but if you're being gentle with it, it shouldn't. And I use that just to press down into that little crevice, and it gives me a nice, clean, straight line. And then once I've perforated it, I can just gently pull away, and you can see that come right up there. Right, see? Nice and clean on that edge, nice and straight. Again, I'm going to just clean up that little corner there where it was sticking off. Voila. Now I still have a little bit down here at the bottom, so when you get to these ends of the cuticle here, you have to be very careful, because this is where I see people using cuticle sticks, and they will push and drag, and you don't want to do that. If you push and drag, there's a good chance that you're going to tear that strip and you're going to get a very jagged edge, and that's definitely not the look you're going for. It's going to be the cleanest if you press and pull straight away. So you want to press and pull away. You don't want to press and drag. I'm going to do that same thing on this other side over here. But first, I'm going to use my thumbnail to kind of try and press it down. And actually, sometimes if I have a good enough like ledge there, it'll just break when I'm doing it, right? So now I have a nice clean edge. Again, I'm going to clean up this cuticle here at the bottom. But you want to pull away, don't drag. All right, so now I have two well manicured middle fingers, and I can use this the same mani, and I can add an overlay, like a glittery overlay over the top, maybe some sort of glitter if I like to. And I'm going to just pull this strip off, do the same thing. This one I don't have to trim, but I did use it as a guide to trim the other one. And I'm just going to pull off that excess tab there. See, it's rounded on both ends now. And I'm going to place it at the cuticle line. And it's also just a little bit wide, but again, we'll come back and clean that up in a minute. I think if I can pull the skin back and make sure that nail strip touches the nail, not the skin, it's going to make it a better point of contact, and it's going to make it for a cleaner edge. All right, so I'm going to pull the skin back here. If you can see, I pull the skin back and I press that strip right on down to the nail. And now I can go ahead and perforate it at the top. And again, we don't have to over manipulate it, right? We don't have to over trim. We don't have to get too trim happy. Sometimes these little pieces will come off easily once it's dried and cured. So don't pick at it too much. Just trust it and let it go. Because you can see they held off the back a little, and you can kind of grab it a little, but be very careful, because if you start tearing the top of this nail strip here, you're not going to be able to get that back. You're either going to need to trim your nail or apply another strip. All right, so here on the side, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use my thumbnail, and I'm going to pull the skin back, and I'm going to use my thumbnail to get into that crevice a bit. Now you can use your thumbnail and fully perforate it. That's one option. Or, like I mentioned earlier, you can use that metal or any rubber tipped cuticle stick to help perforate by pushing down, just to get a nice clean edge. And once you press down, you can pull away and you'll see it start to separate. That's a nice clean edge. If you start pulling and dragging, you're going to get that jaggedy edge, and that's definitely not what you want. Now I have a little bit right here at the edge of my nail that I'm going to just clean up with a little bit of a press of that cuticle stick, and boom, it's nice and clean. Okay, awesome. You can do the same thing with the strip on the other nail. I'm going to line it up to the base of my cuticle. Now remember, all of our fingers are slightly different sizes, so it's okay if we have to trim some more than others. But once I have it lined up, I'm just going to press it down a little, remove that plastic or the paper backing. I'm going to press it down across the nail, get it nice and warm. And I'm going to use my thumbnail here. Just to perforate underneath of the nail. Okay, and that's going to help me to make sure that I cover the edge of my nail, so that when it cures, if it retreats back a little bit, I don't have naked nail showing there. All right, so on this side, it's pretty clean. If it hangs off just a little bit, like right there, you can see it'll just flake right off, and that's okay. Then on this side over here, I'm just going to use my thumbnail to push down into that crevice. Pull it right off, and boom, I have a nice straight edge. And then sometimes what I find is here where I've got the cuticles, this once it cures, it's a lot easier to get off those little bitty pieces there, so that I have a nice straight edge on the side there. 'Cause sometimes my nails are funny shaped. They're not the beautiful almond shaped nails that of all the models have. So that's what I got. All right, and then we'll go back and we will trim off some of these little rough edges here once it's fully cured. I just go back with a nail file and buff the edges, smooths them out, and voila, what you think?